Hey everyone, Andre here, and to Link to the Past 30th anniversary, and to help celebrate this, might be one of Link to the Past's biggest fans, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Rebecca Stone, aka ForestMinish. How are you doing, Rebecca?
Hi, Andre. Super excited to be talking about my favorite game, A Link to the Past. I like it just a little tiny bit.
Just a small bit.
Just a tiny bit.
I saw you, I think you liked my Link to the Past tweet, and I'm like, I've got to talk about this with Rebecca. I remember her being a huge fan of this from today, and I'm excited to talk about it. Originally, I wasn't going to cover this, but I just have so much going on. I'm like, how can I not talk about what might be not only one of the best Zeldas, if not the best Zelda, but one of the best games of all time, that still 30 years later, I think, holds up amazingly well.
Can you believe it's been 30 years? I saw that pop up on my feed today, and I'm like, wait, that can't be right. 30?
How is that possible? I don't get it. I should clarify, I forget I mentioned it, it's the 30th anniversary in North America. It's a little older in Japan already, but we both played it, in North America. Although I think, I don't know, you probably didn't play it right when it launched though, is that right?
No, I wasn't even alive when it came out, so I played it I was really young when I played it, but yeah, it must have been towards the mid to late 90s when I played it.
And was it your first Zelda game?
It was not only my first Zelda game, but it was my first video game ever. It introduced me to video games. What better one to start with? It set the bar really high, but...
I was going to say, like, that sounds incredible on the one hand. On the other, how does anything else compare? Like, it's all downhill from there.
Well, it easily made me a video game fan, so It did its job.
Good point. Yeah, I don't know if I played it right when it came out either, but I did get it probably not too long after. Actually, in my case, what happened is we had picked up, my parents got me a Game Genie for some reason for the NES, and I don't know why we got that. I guess it looked cool, but it didn't work, or we couldn't figure it out. I don't fully know what happened there, so we ended up taking it back, and my parents let me exchange it for something else, and I saw a little game called Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I'm like, that looks interesting, let's grab that. And little did I know, it too, for me, would be one of the best games ever made, and I think that was a pretty good swap I made in that case.
Absolutely.
And that was also my first Zelda, I'm pretty sure. I'm sure I'd seen Zelda on NES, but I don't think I ever really played it. So it was pretty incredible launching into, what is now also one of my favorite series, and I'm sure it is for you as well, considering your entire branding, I think, is partially based around that, right? So yeah, I guess let's start off with, why do we think this game is so good? Like, what makes A Link to the Past a game that, that may not just be our favorites, but is also objectively, I think, for many people, one of the best games ever made?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said that you probably didn't even hear about Zelda before that. I know that the first two games were for the NES. This was its first step into the Super Nintendo. They had a lot more to work with. They had a lot more technology.
Right.
They were able to do a lot more with the game, and I feel like this is really the Zelda game that defined what the series was. We see a lot of influence and inspiration in the Zelda games today that come from A Link to the Past. It was the first game with the Master Sword. It was the first... a lot of different things, that have stayed true to the series. I think also just the fact of how big of a game it was. I know that when I was playing it, I didn't expect, once I got sent to the Dark World, for there to be all these more dungeons there's a whole nother world essentially to explore. So I think the grandness, the sense of exploration, it just did so much more than what came before it.
Yeah, you raise a lot of good points there, and the second world, the Dark World in this case, was a literal game changer, to the point that Nintendo basically reused the idea themselves ad nauseum between, different time periods in Ocarina of Time, of course repeating the mechanic in Link Between Worlds. Metroid Prime 2 had a Dark World. Like, Nintendo loves their Dark Worlds now, and it all started here with A Link to the Past. And this entire game felt epic. Like, from the very start of the game, you're already on a mission to rescue the princess who, contacts you telepathically. And it just sets up this amazing adventure where you're already basically on the run. Like, you encounter signs, asking people to, look out for Link. And it's like, man, there's a manhunt out for me. And you've even encountered that in the village. Like, people are like, oh my god, it's Link, let's get him, and they call a soldier. It's so great. The game just has this epic feel. And as you mentioned, when it feels like it's climaxing, you're not even halfway over.
Right.
That's when the Dark World's introduced, this whole second world, which has far more gameplay. Though in hindsight, because I was an idiot kid, it didn't occur to me that, wait, my inventory is like barely full. Like, there has to be more to this game. It was still a huge surprise for me, or it was a huge surprise for me having this second world. And it was so neat having, not only seeing how that extended the narrative and the gameplay, but also the interplay between the two, where you had to hop between the two worlds to solve puzzles, and you had to really kind of think, I don't know if fourth dimensionally is the right term here, but it basically was. You had to think outside the box in this case to kind of figure out how to progress. So yeah, I think the Dark World is a major reason for why this game like really kind of stood out at the time.
There's just so much sense of exploration. Like, obviously the first Zelda game, and I guess even the second Zelda game, were essentially open world games. You could explore wherever you wanted. Right. But A Link to the Past, it felt like really every single screen had some kind of purpose, something to do on, in that area. And you could essentially just walk around, and you don't have to go right to the dungeons. You could do the dungeons in so many orders. I remember that when I was a kid, I would just explore around the world and look for different things to do. And you could do a surprising number of things before you really do any of the dungeons, just because of how jam-packed the world really is.
Yeah, there's so much going on there. Like, you can lift up a rock to find a hidden passageway, or you can cut a bush under a jumping rabbit thing and he'll give you money. Like, there are secrets everywhere, and at the time, especially, like, as a kid, like, it felt like a big world. And looking back on it, it's like it really wasn't that big, but it still feels big enough, and there's so much going on in every quarter of it, or every corner of it, that yeah, it just feels like you're never gonna see it all. I mean, I had the player's guide for that game, which itself had like endless secrets, and I still feel like it didn't have everything that the game
right,
had.
and that was essentially doubled with the Dark World too. You think you explored every single corner of Hyrule, and look, it's different now. It's the Dark World. Kakariko Village is different now. It's
right.
Run down. There's thieves everywhere. So that expanded it as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite things actually in games, I don't know if it's just me, but I love it whenever a game takes something we knew and changes it in some way. So like in Banjo-Tooie, I loved revisiting Spiral Mountain and seeing how that was different. And in this case, like, it was in the same game where we're kind of revisiting a world we're familiar with, but it's very different now. As you mentioned, the Dark World is like the Dark Town, whatever it is, Dark Hyrule, or Kakariko Village. It's kind of scary. Like, it's disturbing looking. And the whole Dark World is actually really unnerving. I mean, I remember when, I can't fully remember, but I think the first time I encountered this was when you encountered the optional entry point into it, where you can't really do much of anything. You turn into a rabbit, and it's like, what the heck's going on? I remember that just blowing my mind. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Why am I a rabbit? Why does this world look completely different? And of course, that's just like a small peek into this much larger world that, eventually you can explore as Link. And it was such a cool feeling. Like, I don't know if that's something that even people playing it today for the first time would fully be able to appreciate, just because, it's obviously a game of its time. I think it holds up remarkably well, but I just wonder if the feeling would be the same, given everything else that's happened in gaming over those 30 years.
That's a good point, and I think that's interesting because they do introduce you to the Dark World before the introduction to the Dark World. you can't, like you said, you can't do much, but they give you enough that there are some questions. Like, I think there's those two monsters on that cliff that you can talk to, and they kind of give some hints about how they were turned into this form, and you're in a weird form, and then before long, you are back in your normal Hyrule, and you go into the Tower of Hera, and you're doing the next dungeon, and it's kind of put into the back of your mind at that point. You don't really go back there right away.
No, yeah, you don't. And I love that little tease, that little peek into a future they're not quite sure what it is. It almost felt like, it was a mystery. Like, in the game has like, a lot of mystery surrounding a lot of the elements of it, but this of course was the big one, and I love that. Like, it provided kind of like a little bit of a hook for you to be like, what was that about? Like, why did they turn into a rabbit there, And I love how that tied into the whole narrative of like how the Dark World, you turn into like what's reflective of your heart. So I guess Link thinks of himself as a pink bunny. I never quite fully understood that, but like this cute, adorable, fluffy creature, which I guess maybe helps explain why he has pink hair in the game for some reason.
Ooh, it could.
Yeah, maybe. But I just loved everything about that. It really did just make the game feel like epic on a whole new scale that we hadn't seen before. And you touched on it earlier, with this being kind of, of course, an evolution of the Zelda series, the third game in the series. But this one is a little different because it came after it came after Zelda 2, which itself was a weird kind of take on Zelda as we'd known up to that point. You just recently played through Zelda 2, right, actually?
I did, for the very first time. I finally beat it.
Yeah, real quick detour. How was that?
Well, I used the Switch Online save states and rewind. There's no way I would have the patience today to play that game, traditionally. But it was hard, but I didn't hate it. It was cool to see that they were experimenting with the different things. I'm glad that they went back to the first formula with A Link to the Past, and that's how they stuck with the Zelda series. But I don't know. I don't think it's as terrifying as people say.
I still haven't really fully played it myself, so I may have to revisit it one of these days. But yeah, that kind of speaks to my point, where Zelda 2 is so very different from Zelda 1. And Zelda 3, or A Link to the Past, felt like a return to form, while taking that original Zelda concept and really just kind of expanding it as much as they could given the platform. And while it wasn't like, I guess, true open world in the same sense that the first Zelda was, especially with how they mark the suggested order of dungeons on the map.
Right.
But as you said earlier, you don't have to follow that order. You can do it out of order at several points, and that's not even accounting for the fact that there's tons of stuff all over the world, as you mentioned as well, that you can find and go engage with, different mini games or secrets to find, that still had a very open feeling, even if it is paired a little bit more with a Metroid-esque style of unlocking the world, like how you get the hammer to pound down the spikes that lets you progress into the next area. And I think it really just found I think part of the reason why this game still holds up for me to this day is it found a perfect balance. Like, it didn't feel too open, it didn't feel too closed off, it felt just right. Like, everything feels like it has its own space, its own purpose in this world, and you never really truly feel lost. You may briefly, but you always have some like loose idea of what to do next, and it just has like a really gratifying feeling of when you can access a new area and just see what is there to do, and as you slowly unlock these new worlds, which culminates, of course, or maybe not culminates, but one of the highest points is unlocking an entire new world, It's just such a great feeling that I think a lot of games don't quite capture these days. So I haven't played Tunic fully yet, so I've heard that gets close, maybe that gets a little close to that feeling.
Yeah, and I like what you said about how it is open, but it never really felt overwhelming either, because you're right, if you came to a part where maybe you couldn't lift the rock because it was too heavy, I'm not supposed to go in this area, let me explore somewhere else, and then later you get, the mitt that lets you carry those heavy rocks, and you think, oh wait, I saw a few of those around, let me go back and explore those. It really does hit that formula, I think, in a logical way that didn't exist in the first Zelda game. I know for that game I felt very lost. What is this item supposed to do? What am I supposed to cut down to find the path? It's not like that in A Link to the Past.
That's a great point. Yeah, like a lot of the common complaints about the original Zelda, whether or not it's accurate, is like you have to go burn random bushes, to find out what to do next. And that's something that A Link to the Past definitely, I think, does a lot better. It does way better signposting, I think, like way better, a much better job of organically teaching you how to play the game or what to keep an eye out for.
Right.
It's pretty clear how each item will interact with the world, or the obstacles that you encounter, like what maybe will counter them, or when you get the item that you can probably counter it. So yeah, it really, at the time, it felt like a culmination of everything Nintendo had learned across its 15 to 20 years of game development at that point. I think probably like closer to 15. And it really just felt like it was firing on all cylinders. It's like, yeah, we know how to make a game now. Like, here's all the lessons we've learned from the past, 15 years in one tight little package. And I remember like reading that the game is only I think not even 8 megabytes. I think it's 8 megabits, which is nothing. I think that's like 2 megabytes. It's like, how did they cram that amazing of an adventure, like 2 entire worlds, in like 2 megabytes?
Magic.
I think that's
the only explanation.
Yeah, this is also the first time we had a magic meter, right? Or was that Zelda 2?
There was magic in Zelda 2, but it worked a little bit differently.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like everything in Zelda 2 worked a little differently. I don't know about you, so I'm a big fan, I'm sure a lot of people are a big fan of this, but like, I in particular am very particular about how a game opens. Like, if a game doesn't hook me immediately, it takes a lot. I mean, I usually give up. And if not, it takes a lot to kind of re-engage me back in the experience. I think A Link to the Past has one of the best openings, not just in Zelda, but in gaming history. Where, like, as I mentioned earlier, like, you rescue the princess within the first 5 minutes. After you trying to find, like, a secret entrance into the castle. Like, it felt like you're on like this covert mission, and like you're really kind of like trying to stealthily sneak through the castle, evade the guards, find the princess, bring her to sanctuary, and then you find out, oh, the story's only just beginning. What did you think of it, though? How do you think that stacks up to other Zelda or other games in general?
Yeah, I think at least nowadays I definitely prefer these Zelda games, or even games in general, that just throw you into it right away.
Yep.
There's not a big long tutorial, there's not a big long, cutscenes after cutscenes explaining the backstory. I like when it just throws you right into it and you gotta figure it out, and maybe they feed you little pieces of it as you go. And that's exactly what A Link to the Past does. They throw you into it, but it's not, they give you a pretty defined path of where you're supposed to go. You can't go the wrong way. There's guards, on the screens where you're not supposed to go, so you can't get through that way. But you're right, it does feel like you're on this mission. You're supposed to sneak in. You can pretty easily find the hole where you're supposed to sneak down into, because that's the only way to go. You find your uncle who is dying or hurt or whatever. I don't think he dies. You see that at the credits. And then that's when you start realizing, like, oh no, like, I need to go, rescue the princess. He's leaving me his sword and shield. It's up to me now. And you make your way through the castle. You fight your first, like, little boss, mini boss type of thing, right, to get her, and you feel powerful when you're doing it.
Yeah, you do. Like, it does a great job of making you feel like, it really did feel like you're, like, I guess for me, it almost felt like, I was a big fan of Never Ending Story growing up, so it almost felt like a game version of that. Like, I'm going on this quest to save the world and rescue the princess,
Mm-hmm.
And it just felt really good, especially at a young age. Like, for instance, looking back, like the bush you need to find, like, there's a freaking path leading right up to it. Like, you literally can't miss it. As a kid, I'm like, oh my god, I found a secret entrance into the castle. Like, I figured it out. I'm a genius. I think that's partially why A Link to the Past. Not that. Most of the solutions are a little bit more complicated than that, but the game does a great job of just making it feel good anytime you do something or progress further in the game. Whether there's a new item, getting a new area, finding out a new plot point, uncovering a whole new world, encountering the different baddies in their various forms. Like, is it Aghanim? Is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Aghanim? I don't know. Okay,
that's how I always said it.
And then, like, when it's revealed at the end, spoilers, that, like, when he turns into a bat, and it's like, oh, it was Ganon all along, or whatever that ended up being. It's just so many good memories of this game. Do you have any points that stand out in particular to you, beyond the ones we mentioned already?
I just really love the dungeons in that game.
Yeah,
Zelda games to me are really all about the dungeons, and I think that they are great. There is not a bad dungeon in that game. There's some really annoyingly hard ones. The Ice Palace is a nightmare. It was such a nightmare that they changed it in the Game Boy Advance version because it was such a nightmare. I still don't know how to solve that dungeon the correct way.
It's tough. Yeah, I'd have to go back and replay it too. I know it involves, like, dropping an ice brick, like, multiple levels, I think.
Yeah.
Do you remember how they addressed that in the GBA one by chance, or?
I'm not sure, but nowadays I always go out of my way to get the cane that makes blocks for you. I do that dungeon first, even though you're not supposed to first, just so I don't have to go through the whole dungeon, go around, so I can set the block myself without figuring out how to push it down. But there's multiple ways to do it. They let you do that. It's not a glitch. You can go out of your way to do it that way if you want to. So we see a little bit of that too, how there's multiple solutions for some things. There's some ways to jump across gaps that aren't glitches. It's just ways that the game allows you to do.
Right, yeah, it's the multiple solutions, is almost like an early preview of Breath of the Wild, nearly 25 years later. So, the dungeons in this game are just fantastic. I'm a weird Zelda fan in that the dungeons are typically my least favorite part of the game, which I understand is super bizarre. But I think the dungeons here are, as you said, like, fantastic across the board. And I think it's partially too, like, they really, even though, this was based in some, on Zelda 1 to some degree, they really start playing with the format of dungeons. In the first game, you could just kind of like buy keys to cheese your way through them, and all the dungeons kind of felt a little samey. Here, they all had very distinct, not just visual and thematic designs, but also like the puzzle, how the puzzles worked and how they were integrated into the environment. One of my favorite examples is the one in the Dark World. I forget what it's called, the skull-looking place.
And the Skull Woods?
Skull Woods! You think I could connect to those two. The skull place in the woods. What's it called? But how you would have to exit the dungeon at points and re-enter it at others. Like, that was really
That's a really good one, because part of it, there are puzzles that are outside as well as inside. You have to figure out which holes to drop through, which, going back to the very beginning, it taught you how to drop through a hole, so now you know that could be a solution later on. Using the items to, I think for that dungeon, you get the fire rod, and you need to use that outside to open up, like, the path to the very end of the dungeon. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the items, I mean, the items tie into it as well. Like, those were fun to use and uncover, because they all felt like, this would become a problem with some later Zeldas, one in particular, where the items felt just like keys to progress, effectively were elaborate keys just to progress and had really no use outside of them. But here, in this case, like, the items felt impactful, literally in the case of the hammer and some others. But it felt, you could, like, fight enemies with them, you could solve multiple puzzles with them, they would open up new things to do in the overworld. And as you kind of touched on earlier, I think, was the cane you found an optional item, I believe? Or
I think that one was a required dungeon item, but you could do some of the dungeons out of order to get that early to help you with some of the other puzzles. But I think Link to the Past is one of the few, even today, Zelda games where some of these items that you get in dungeons, there's nothing that I hate more than when you get a really awesome item and you use it in a dungeon and then you never use it again. Like, I know Twilight Princess is really guilty of that.
The spinner.
There are some so cool items in that game. The spinner, the ball and chain, like, there's awesome items, and then you just never use them again. But in A Link to the Past, a lot of these items that you're picking up, you use throughout the whole journey. Like, you have this arsenal of items. I know in Turtle Rock, like, you need to use the fire rod, you need to use that cane to make platforms. Like, you're using everything throughout the whole game.
Yeah, it really demands you have a mastery of your entire inventory, which is great. I love that. Yeah, let me experiment and see what I need to use here, rather than, as you mentioned, Twilight Princess, not to beat up that game too much, where
the items are
like,
so cool, I had so much potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I remember the item I was thinking of earlier that I was thinking was optional. The cape, I believe, is optional.
Yes, yeah.
And that's such a cool item, like a complete optional thing that turns you invisible, makes parts of the game way easier, but then you have to balance that with your magic meter, which can prevent you from using another item later. So, just everything feels perfectly balanced in To the Past. It was all just perfectly crafted. Yeah, it's so good. Circling back to the GBA version, do you have a preference between the two? Because the GBA version is actually pretty faithful, but they also made a few small tweaks here and there. So I was wondering if you had a preference between the two, and if you would recommend anyone play one of the two if they had the choice.
I don't like the GBA version. I don't know. I'm pretty traditional with original releases. It doesn't really add anything. I mean, it does make the Ice Palace easier. I don't think it's that, like, impossibly hard to begin with. The thing that I really don't like about the GBA version of A Link to the Past, and this is totally, like, trivial, I don't like that they added, when you swing your sword, Link makes, like, the grunting sounds. I think it's the same sounds that he has as Child Link in Ocarina of Time. It's very similar, if it's not exactly the same. And it just, I don't know why it annoys me. Maybe it's because I'm used to that not being there. But it's like the, I don't know, it's just an annoying sound that doesn't need to be there.
Nintendo was all about that in the GBA era. Like, Mario would not shut up in those platforming games. And I don't know why they did that, so I actually do agree with you. I remember when I got A Link to the Past on GBA for, like, Christmas one year, and I finished it that same day. I spent 12 hours. I don't think I'd ever played a game that long before. I'm like, oh my god, this game's still amazing. But I do think in hindsight, I still prefer the Super NES version. It's just the pure one, but I don't think you can really go wrong with either of them.
They really aren't that different. For whatever reason, if that's your only way to play A Link to the Past in 2022, go for it.
So when did you play A Link to the Past most recently? How long has it been for you?
Probably a few months ago. I return to that game a lot. I play the randomizer, the fan-driven randomizer, every once in a while. People have done really cool things with that, and that breathes some new life into the game as well. If you love the game and you want to experience it in a different way, check out the randomizer. It is so cool.
Yeah, I actually really want to check that out, because, I know the game pretty well by this point, so it'd be nice to have it be a bit different. So
it challenges what you think you know about it.
Wow. Yeah, because items could just end up in like random temples, right? Or random dungeons.
Yeah, it shuffles. They have a few different settings for it, but the basic one just shuffles all of the items, and you really have to think about, well, what do I need to get to this place to try to get that, and it kind of puts it all on its head a little bit.
Oh, that's gotta make the beginning of the game a lot more difficult if you don't get the lamp right away, right?
I think they give you light, when you need it if you don't have the lamp.
Okay, all right.
There are settings that don't. There's like ultra hard settings where you have to navigate dark rooms, but they have easier settings.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I'll definitely check that out. That sounds awesome. That actually did remind me of one thing, though, like another thing that just kind of shows how much they thought about every element of this game, where initially, when you first start the game, you're given the lamp in your house. There's a treasure chest there, you really can't miss it, it gives you the lamp, but if for whatever reason you decide to miss it, you decide, I don't want the treasure, I don't want what's in that thing, the game will try to give it to you on the next 2 treasure chests as well.
I think you get 3 tries to get it.
Yeah. So again, like that just shows how much thought they put in every element of this game. I feel like it's just such a perfectly crafted experience that, I mean, I think I mentioned, I forget this was the tweet you liked, but there aren't many games, or really any games I would consider to be like perfect, like in that they're like, airtight, effectively flawless for what they are. I think A Link to the Past is that game. I don't know if that means it's my favorite game, but certainly among them, but I do think like it's a game I look at, I'm like, I don't think there's a single flaw here. This is a flawless experience.
It's pretty close. Yeah, it's pretty close. It's interesting that you say that about the treasure chest with the lantern in it, because they do give you 3 chances. It would really stink if you get all the way to Zelda, you get all the way to the sewers, and you're like, I don't have a lamp. And I was thinking, well, maybe they were trying to avoid that, but then that just made me think about I don't know if you remember the ice rod that you need to defeat the boss. You need both the fire rod and the ice rod to defeat the turtle rock boss.
Right.
And you can find that item in the overworld, in the light world, like way at the opposite side of the map. So if for some reason you didn't explore that corner, you didn't get the ice rod, you're in the dark world, you're at the very end of the turtle rock dungeon, about to kill the boss, and you don't have the ice rod, you don't even know what you need. You don't know where to get it. It's way on the other side. So that could be unfortunate to go all the way back and try to find that if you didn't get that. So, but of course, that's the beginning of the game versus the very end of the game. So,
can't believe you're poking holes in my flawless arguments.
Hopefully, you explored by then.
Yeah, that would be a problem if you don't have the item then. Is there anything else about A Link to the Past that stands out to you, whether it's a particular moment in the game or just like an overall feeling about it that you think it did well?
The soundtrack is so timeless.
Yes.
It's so good. There's so many songs that still get stuck in my head from that game. I don't know, it introduced so many good things, and it had a lot of charm. Like, I feel like we talked a little bit earlier about the village, how there's people in the village that you can interact with for the first time that have names, they have stories. There's a little sick boy who you can help, and he'll give you something in return. And there really is just something in every corner. You can find a man under the bridge, and he gives you a bottle. Like,
I love that one.
Who thinks of this stuff,
But you don't even know they can go under the bridge. Like, it's not even something in the game.
It's just if you decide to try it and explore it, and it really rewards that with something good too.
Yes, right. It's something really good, being a bottle, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Which, and that's like one of my few complaints about Breath of the Wild, where every reward is basically the same. Like, I just want a bottle. Like, give me a bottle or something, for finding this Korok instead of the frickin' seed. So Breath of the Wild, or Link to the Past had some great rewards, and I want to get back to your music point too, because not only was the music, I think, great, but it worked so well in complementing the environments. Like, I think that really helped the storytelling and environmental settings, and that really kind of helped bring them to life. And the world here felt so much more varied than it had before in Zelda 1 or Zelda 2, where each region in the world did feel distinct. I'm thinking specifically right now of the Lost Woods, and how kind of unsettling the music was. You combine that with the fog effect they had, and then the weird thief character you encounter. Like, I got scared of that place as a kid. Like, that place was terrifying to me.
And then it gets noticeably different when you pull the Master Sword, and all of a sudden there's light shining through, and there's squirrels running by, and rabbits and birds, and it's like a happy place now.
Like, I love that too. Like, you can go check out the Master Sword before you can pick it up. You can go see it, and you're like, okay, well, I would like to have this now, but I can't, so maybe I'll come back later. So it's such a great feeling when you are able to accomplish that later. You are able to get the Master Sword. And then, of course, it's at that point that the game is really only just beginning still. I don't think we're not even in the Dark World at that point yet, right? If I remember correctly. Yeah, that's right, because you use that to break the the Aghanim seal on the castle. So, it's so good. This game is just too good, Rebecca.
You're making me want to replay it now. I feel like I should replay it for the anniversary.
I'm making myself want to replay it. This conversation right now is, I should be playing that in this very moment. I was going to ask one other thing about it. I'm trying to remember what the heck it was. I forget. But yeah, any other final details, Rebecca, you can think of that you think is why this game still holds up 30 years later before we wrap it up?
The final battle is hard as nails. You can get pushed off of the platform and have to start it all over again.
Oh my god, it's brutal. Yeah, freaking Ganon. And he just shoves you off this collapsing platform. It's like, you are a jerk. I don't appreciate that. And it kind of harkens back to the first boss. The first boss, I believe. The worm thing. I'm sure you know the name. That pushes you off.
Moldorm, yeah.
Moldorm, thank you.
Yeah.
Which can push you off the platform as well.
Yes.
And that whole final sequence, by the way, like the build up to the temple or the pyramid you start on with it creating a hole in it, and you can drop on in, you fight Ganon that way. And then, of course, what might be one of the greatest game secrets of all time being what's the room called? Do you remember someone won a contest, they had a...
Yes, the Chris Houlihan room.
There we go. Thank you. I'm glad we got you here, the Zelda expert. Which is like almost nearly impossible to actually encounter in the game. Like, I think it's way more difficult than it was intended to be. Or
I think it was like, I don't know for sure, but I think it was supposed to be like, and I don't know what this means, programmers probably do, like a fail-safe room that if the game glitched the wrong way or something, it would like go to that room instead of crashing the entire game. And so you can access it. Like if you're just playing the game normally, you're not gonna experience it, but there's ways that you can trigger it, and you can actually go in, and it's a room full of rupees, and there's a little sign that says like, this is the Chris Houlihan room, like, it's my secret room, don't tell anybody.
I'm so jealous. Yeah, it's a secret to everybody.
It's a secret to everybody. I think that's what it says.
Oh, awesome. All right, great.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous of that kid, or whoever that person was. Like, do we even know who they are? Like, has anyone interviewed them? Maybe I should catch up with them.
I want to know what he's doing today. Is he still a Zelda fan? Like, right? Who is he?
Yeah, like, to have your name set in stone in one of the best games of all time has to be something that's got to be a good feeling, I feel like. Hopefully.
I would love to know what he's up to today.
Yeah, same here. I'm gonna do some Googling after this. Maybe we'll check in with him.
Yeah.
Would you want, final question I think, perhaps, unless I think of more. Would you want a remaster of this game, or do you think it's pretty much perfect as is? Like, do you think they should remake it, and if so, what does that look like to you? What does a remaster remake of this look like?
You know, I think about this a lot for Super Nintendo games in general. To me, they've aged way more gracefully than probably any other type of game, just visually and mechanically. And I think that, you know, I would like it if they did, but I don't know that it needs it, and I feel like what they did with A Link Between Worlds is the best thing that they could have done, because in a lot of ways it really was a remake. It had a lot of similar dungeons, it had a lot of, you know, the same overworld, you know, some similar characters and whatnot, but it gave us a fresh new story, a fresh new experience. There were some differences with it, but it was like the perfect callback for fans of A Link to the Past. So really that was what I think the best way they could have handled a remake for it.
Right.
Though I see a lot of this style with the HD 2D type of games, like the triangle strategy and all of those. And I think if they did remake it, I would want it to be in that kind of style, just because I love that sprite-based look, and I think you would lose a lot of the charm of that game if they went a different route with it. So I'm not like actively begging for a remake, but I wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point with the charm of it. Like, the Super NES really did... It almost was like the perfect era in how the games have aged, like mechanically and visually. Like, it just struck a really good balance, unlike, say, the 64, where most games don't hold up so great visually. And I do think, like, when you look at a game like the Link's Awakening remake on Switch, like, I think the remake looks fantastic. It looks great.
It's so cute. Yes, it's good.
It's adorable, yeah. But it also loses something in the process, or maybe I don't know if I want to say it loses something. It changes it in the process. Like, it just feels a little different. Like, the visual style just it kind of changes how I felt about some areas compared to the sprite-based look in the original Game Boy version. And I think that is a issue they would run if they decided to completely revamp A Link to the Past graphics. Like, I'm sure they could make it look amazing. It might look even better objectively. But would it be able to capture the same charm doing that? Yeah,
I think we would always feel that way, and especially because we grew up with it, it's so important to us. The good news is if they ever remade it like that or in a different style, it doesn't take away the original. We can still go back and play it and enjoy it. So I don't think it's bad to remake games in totally different styles like that, because it might be introducing somebody like Link's Awakening. Maybe they never would have considered playing the Game Boy game before, but they got to experience this game and this world in a way that they feel is accessible to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, whatever introduces more people to this amazing game, I'm completely down with. Although Nintendo's done a pretty good job of making it available on practically every platform under the sun.
Very true.
Pretty much on everything. I do have to ask one more thing just to follow up to what we were just talking about. But I know this is kind of a divisive question between what game is better, A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. I know you kind of already addressed this not directly earlier, but I am curious then, I assume, what makes A Link to the Past for you better than A Link Between Worlds?
Yeah, I do like A Link to the Past better, and I think that's just like a nostalgic bias because it was my first game. I did grow up with it. I've played it the most. I will say the only thing that I think A Link Between Worlds has over it is the story. I think that it has such a good story that A Link to the Past, it's just kind of told very passively. It's very standard in a lot of ways. Whereas I think A Link Between Worlds kind of takes that next step with, what their version of the Dark World really is. Dark World, Lovril? I always can't say that right. Lovril. Like what that is and why they're there and who these characters are and what the Triforce means to them. I think it takes that a step further and it's really better than A Link to the Past in that way. I think, it's been 30 years. If you look back in 30 more years, I think that we're going to still think that A Link to the Past has aged more gracefully, visually, stylily, I don't know. I don't think A Link Between Worlds is bad, but I just have a preference.
No, I totally get you. And I think kind of to go back to your point about the visuals, I think there's something about the somewhat ambiguous look of A Link to the Past, with it being sprite work. I remember, by the way, I don't know if you had this issue, where, there have been debates over what in the hell is the Aghanim sprite? Is that his head, or is that his head?
Oh my gosh, there is this one picture that shows you what it's supposed to... Is that what you're talking about? It shows you what it's supposed to look like, and what I saw, I definitely saw it the wrong way for my entire life, and when I saw that picture, I'm like, what? That's not his hat or whatever it was.
Oh, 100% here, and I refuse to see it the proper way. I'm like, no, that's not the Aghanim I know. Or
or his face is squished down and really the whole thing. I don't know. I like to see it my way. I won't see it any other way.
Exactly, same here.
But you're right. The sprites did that to us. We saw it in a way that it probably wasn't intended to be seen that way.
Exactly. It kind of let our imagination run wild. It looked good enough that it looked good without looking real. There was enough lack of definition there, for lack of a better word. It was all two-dimensional, all completely flat sprites, that your imagination kind of filled in the gaps,
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about this era too was we had some amazing artwork from Nintendo officially, whether it's in the instruction booklet or the player's guide. Yes. And I always loved how that looked, and I think that's something too that I love modern Zelda games as well, but I think I did like A Link to the Past somewhat seemingly more serious tone than what we've gotten at points in some of the other Zeldas since then. And I think the artwork that they had to help illustrate the elements of the game helped really kind of drive that point home, or helped me appreciate or embrace what A Link to the Past was, where it just had this more mature feeling, I think, especially from Nintendo at that point, where it felt like it wasn't geared just toward kids. Not that Mario ever was either, but definitely felt a little bit more mature.
Yeah, it wasn't like that happy little Super Mario World adventure, Yoshi's Island. It did have, I think, kind of a darker, theme to it. Right. Even that artwork, the one that is sticking out in my mind is the one where Link is leading Zelda through the sewer. He has the lantern up and she's behind him, and I think you can see the bats flying around them. You can see kind of the sewers, it's dripping, and looking through all of those, the instruction manual and the guidebook as a kid, and just seeing that, it helped you really imagine that world as you're playing it. You're looking at pixels, but then in your mind, you're kind of seeing this whole big scene, and it just makes your mind think of all these cool things when you're playing.
Yep, no, that's exactly it. Like, this felt like a world that was lived in. It felt like it had lore to it. I'm not one who usually cares about lore, but like this world felt complete. It felt like just a real place in the game that it actually existed, had a history to it, and the artwork really helped help bring all that to life as well. So yeah, what an amazing game, even 30 years later. Rebecca, any final thoughts at all? About any overall thoughts that you want to
I was going to say, I can keep talking about this game for the next 4 hours. You'll have to cut me off at some point.
We're going to eat into your workday tomorrow. You're going to be late by 3 hours.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would love to hear. I mean, I love going through and hearing what other people think about, this game, how it's been 30 years, what their own experience with it has been like. When's the last time they play it? Are they like me? Do they revisit this game every once in a while just to re-experience it again? It's just so good.
Yeah, and now that you've reminded me of the randomizer, I really want to revisit it myself. Yeah. Maybe I'll play it normally first, then I'll try the randomizer after.
Good idea.
I can't wait. This game is just truly something special. And if you haven't played it, if you're watching this and you haven't played it, go play it.
What are you doing with your life?
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with you? Go play one of the best Zelda games of all time. All right, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us for the 30th anniversary celebration of A Link to the Past in North America. Where can people follow you at if they want to find out more about your love for this game and Zelda in general? Yeah, you can follow me at ForestMinish on Twitter. I stream on Twitch at the same username. Just tweet at me about Zelda. I'll talk to you about it. It's cool. Yeah, she definitely will. This is proof right here of it. So you can find links to all that in the description below. And with that, thank you for watching. And of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for more anniversary discussions, hopefully at some point in the near future, and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later. Bye, everyone.